Are we all part of the world, or are we separate from it? Can we really truly distinguish ourselves as separated from everything else that goes on around us? Or are we intrinsically built into that system too? That's what I'm going to look at today. It's a question that's kind of been on my mind for years and years, and sometimes you have the thoughts to kind of think things out. Other times you don't even have the language to be able to explain to yourself what you're trying to think about a subject. But today we're going to look at that, the divide between the objective or the external world and the internal or the subjective or the internal world, and explore the idea of maybe is it necessary to have that divide, or is it an artificially constructed thing that we as people put onto the world? More than likely these words are familiar to you and you understand the ideas once they're based on the word, but we tend to be offered the world in terms of two split entities or two split spheres of existence or experience. We've the objective world, which is made up of things, places, others, and objects. And we have the world of the subjective or the inner world, which is our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our own perceptions of things. So essentially we have an inner and an outer world. And in the realm of science, or the world of science, it tends to deal with the world of the objective, positing the idea that truth can only be found by negating or limiting the effect that, or the colour that the subjective experience puts onto the external world. So we try and detach the subject from the object as much as we can, the person from the world, and we try and derive truths based on that. And psychology can tend maybe to go the other way, or other spheres of philosophy, especially modern perspectives on experience and the world and how we construct reality, so that can kind of go the other way, where the focus is heavily on the inner world, our internal dynamics, our internal thought processes, and feelings, etc., and our beliefs. So one tends to emphasize the dominance of the objective world, and while the other tends to emphasize the dominance of the inner world. Both of these approaches obviously have their merits. It's good to know things that are apart from us. The other people, places, things, objects, what things do, what the purpose of instruments or whatever is. It's good to gain that knowledge, and you can certainly gain that by demarcating the world in terms of ourselves and the outer. And also it's good to kind of engage in exploring our own internal workings and dynamics, but in terms of constructing reality or constructing our own experience of the world, is it right to carve the world into these two slices, and just because we are able to conceptualize an inner and an outer world, does that make it so? For example, like, is there really an objective experience of the world which is devoid of subjectivity? There needs to be an experiencer of something. And also, is it possible to have a subjective experience without an objective world? If you were just in a vacuum, can you experience anything? If you've nothing to relate yourself to, then can you have any experience of yourself or where you are or what's going on? This splitting can probably be best emphasized in the kind of common nature and nurture debate. Which realm or which sphere has more influence on the development of the individual? Is it their nature, which would be like their genetics and their biology, their DNA, or is it nurture, which would be their environment and the social scene or the social factors involved in their life? Which has more of a determined influence on the individual. It's pretty common debate, and it's an old enough debate. I'm sure nearly everyone has something to say about that. But again, we have to split again, and couched in the nature or nurture debate is another split, because if you were to assume that we can ever truly define or take as a beginning point the development of an individual, it's splitting off again from non-life into life in terms of the pregnancy in utero and birth, because we're assuming then that the development only starts with the baby once it's born, but that tends to negate the effect that the womb might have on the baby, the mother's subjective experience will have on her body, and in turn on the baby while it's in the womb, and also what the mother's interaction with the objective world, the influence that'll have on her subjective experience, and in turn will have on the baby. So you see, you can't really go back and pick a starting point for the development, because in order to decide which is more important on the development of the baby, you need to look at the experiences of the mother, which are informed by her subjective experience and her interactions with the objective world. Again, so I struggle to see where you could clearly pinpoint a starting point for this argument. So again, you have another split. And my question would be, is that split needed, or is that split real? Because of this, you can end up chasing the chicken down the road looking for the egg, But there's a lot of work being done as well on that topic, on the influence of life in the womb on the baby's psychology, on the baby's development, and also the study of epigenetics, which would be the influence of the environment on one's genes. They're kind of bridging those gaps, thankfully, So we have subjective and objective, and surely those two added together make up the whole world, so things are either subjective or they're objective. But I'll offer you this, maybe there's a third thing, that unifies or negates the need for the split in how we view the world. And the answer, that third thing, is you, of course. As for an example, look at your hand and hold it, rub it. Look at your feet, rub them, if you're into that. What you're doing essentially here is you're unifying, or you're obliterating the dichotomy of subject and object, because you, by that simple action of looking at yourself, observing yourself, you're becoming both. You're both the subject and the object of your own experience in that moment. So the two streams tend to run into the river, which is you. You're unifying both streams. Because the hand could be considered the subject as it grabs the object, that the foot or the other hand, or it rubs the face. But there's also that third thing which is aware of both. And both those actions, the active movement of the hand to grab the passive foot, they both come from the same one source, So again, streams meeting rivers, rivers diverging into streams. And I suppose this probably wouldn't really matter in any way, only for the fact is that I think what I just described there is something that is so ready at hand, it's so in our face, and it's also, we become so accustomed to it that we forget what we're doing, or we forget the magic of it. You know, we become bored by it in some way, so we don't really pay attention to it anymore. You know, and that is the fact that we can study ourselves. And I don't want to use the word study in some cold, detached manner, but just we can observe ourselves. We can observe ourselves observing ourselves. You know, we can create feelings. We can think about those feelings. We can think about how we feel about thinking about our feelings. You know, it's the those Russian dolls, like, you know, it can become incredibly layered, and that's just ourselves, you know. So we unite the subjective and the objective, and we create. I suppose that's probably the important thing. We can create our own area of study, or our own field of play, really, you know, but in ourselves and of ourselves. For instance, take the idea of having a thought. You know, we can choose to identify ourselves with that thought, as in, I am that, or we can kind of bracket it off and detach a little bit and look at it. You know, so the thought becomes the object, and we can look at that and say, what is that thought? You know, what does it entail? What does it involve? Where did it come from? What would it lead to if it was followed by action? And what kind of feeling, what kind of emotion would be a foundation for such a thought to emerge? You know, and then we can bring back in our subjective experience and our subjective experience of that thought, instead of detaching away from it. We can look at ourselves and say, what was it like for me to feel that, or to think that, or to have that idea? Where did that come from? What does that say about me? You know, is that thought mine? Can I add to that thought? You know, so there's loads to play with there. And I think we get so lost in becoming overly attracted to things that are outside of us, such as like the internet or whatever, you know, other people or music or television. And not that those things are bad in themselves, like, but if they start to take the place of the most magical thing there is, which is our ability to reflect on ourselves, if that ability is no longer venerated, or it's no longer worshipped, and it's no longer used, then what do people become? Because we seem to define ourselves or differentiate ourselves from animals based on the fact that we can think. You know, we can conceptualize things. But what if we no longer use that ability? Are we no more than objects then? You know, if we kill off completely the subjective dance with the objective, do we just become objects? And what do people do with objects? Objects are for use. You know, so if you're not constantly engaged with yourself and understanding yourself and being creative with yourself, do you simply then just become an object for somebody to use? And I suppose it could be very easy kind of just to sit in a tower and twiddle your thumbs and get lost in yourself, you know, constantly asking questions, thinking things and following chains of thought. But I suppose it's also very important to never lose sight of the fact that we exist in a world, you know, whether it's split in two or whatever. For the sake of conversation, you can use those categories, but we exist in the world. We probably do not have the ability to imagine ourselves outside of that world, existing on our own. And so, whatever setting we're in, whatever we're looking at, there's an element of ourselves that we're seeing things through, and also that whatever we're looking at, it'll mirror back something to ourselves. You know, for example, if it's raining out, depending on your attitude to rain, of course, The weather can entice us to go outside, or it can kind of repel us, and kind of force us to stay inside. Or, again, depending on your mood, if it's raining out, if you're in great form or whatever, it mightn't bother you too much. But if your mood's a little bit lower, you're a little bit annoyed, it might have a much more negative effect on you, And again, the subject and object seems to be nullified, because the rain itself isn't objectively sad provoking, It depends on the interaction between both, the reciprocal nature of both. Another example would just simply be if you hear birds singing out your window. There's two things that tend to happen straight away. You tend to perceive, as in sense, so you hear the bird singing, but there's also some sort of preference that comes along with that, or it speaks to you, So you might decide, I don't like that, or that's annoying, or that sounds really nice. So the objective world informs you of what's going on, and also of what you like, just as your interaction with it as a subject or as an individual, it influences the objective world, based on your preference or your mood or how you're feeling or your thinking or ideas around things. The external world can become attractive and welcoming, or repulsive and off-putting or hostile. If it's dark, are you afraid of the dark? If you are, then the world might take on a more menacing kind of face. But if you're not, if you're a creature of the night, so to speak, it might kind of beckon you to come out, and smell the air. But there's always a constant engagement between the two, So I think the idea maybe of separating both out and just living and trying to live in one side, you might be losing out on something that is far more creative and imaginative. Being the very thing that makes us or distinguishes us as human beings, There's also another split that tends to be unified in us as people or as individuals, and that's time. Time tends to die in us, or tends to merge and become just the one unit, because we embody our past, we live our present, and we can speculate and imagine about our future. All three can manifest in us seemingly at the same time or in any kind of random order. The past can be very much alive in us right now. And you can kind of break it down like this: like, our feelings on our past can feed the thoughts we have right now in the present, and these can colour or fuel the imaginings of our tomorrow. So we hold all three of them, and they tend to merge and be alive all together at the same time in us at any given moment. And based on our action or our choice or our will, we can decide what to do with that. The choice is always available. So essentially, we're not wholly dominated by just our inner experience or our biological goings on. Neither are we completely dominated by the social sphere or the outer world. There was a merging of the two, so you can either look at the two of them as negating each other or meeting and creating a third. So ultimately, the whole point of this is not to kind of just speculate about things or just to kind of think yourself into a worry. It's just to highlight the fact that as people, as human beings, we possess this faculty of self-reflection, the ability to look at ourselves as if we were looking at another, and enter into dialogue with ourselves. One aspect getting to know another aspect and vice versa, switching roles, understanding motives behind certain thoughts or certain feelings, and asking ourselves, what do these things, feelings or insights, whatever, what do they mean to us? And also resulting from that, then how do they colour my view of the world, you know? How do they motivate my actions in the world? And consequently, how do my actions influence my view of the external world as well? And how does the external world do so in kind to our actions, you know? Because we know, like, we spend so much time kind of thinking about what other people think of us, you know? Do they like us? Are they pretending to like us? Do they not like us but they're not saying it, you know? Do they think we're stupid? It's very rarely actually we think, like, do they think we're really cool, you know? But the main point being is we could probably be better off by asking ourselves those questions about ourselves, you know, and speaking with ourselves instead of just telling ourselves what we are, you know, instead of just saying I am stupid, or I'm a fool, or I'm brilliant. Ask ourselves, how do I know this about myself? What's it like to hear myself say this about myself? And let that little voice that you kind of, even if it's carrying something that you don't like the smell of, you know, let it speak. Yeah,